The howling had gone on for 9 days. I had sent riders to every healer in the Northern Territories, to the pack settlements along the Grey Vein Road, to the solitary practitioners in the mountain holds, to the wandering bone setters and herb women who moved with the season's thaw. Each of them had come. Each of them had stood at the entrance to Korath's den in the east wing of Ashenvane, their medicine pouches open, their voices low and practiced, and each of them had turned back at the same moment, when Korath lifted his head and looked at them. He did not growl. He had always been too large for mere growling. He simply looked, and whatever he saw in them was not enough, and he lowered his head again to the cold stone floor of his den and resumed that sound, a sound that had no clean name in our language, not a howl in the way of grief, not a cry in the way of pain, but something between the two that traveled through the walls of the hold, the way cold travels through old stone. Everywhere and constant. By the 4th day, the wolves in the courtyard had stopped eating. By the 7th, the pack hunters were waking in the night. By the 9th, I had stopped sleeping altogether. I sat at the window of my study with a cup of tea gone cold in my hands and watched the snow come in off the Grey Vein peaks, and I tried to remember the last time the great wolf had been still. 9 years, I thought. Perhaps a little more. Korath had been mine since I was 17 years old, a storm-gray wolf the size of a draft horse, given to the Ashenvane line by a moon-touched elder who had pressed the great wolf's enormous head to my chest and said, without preamble, "He will find your mate before you do." I had laughed at the time. I had been 17. I was not 17 now. I was a man who had loved a woman and watched her leave the world in the space of one winter, and Korath had felt every moment of that loss through the bond we shared. He had not chosen another healer since. He had not chosen anyone. He had stayed in his den for 9 years, and I had let him stay, because I understood the instinct. Some losses are not healed by hands. They are simply carried. But this was different. The sound that had been coming out of the east wing for 9 days was not grief. Grief I knew the shape of. This was something else. Something with an edge of urgency in it. A current running beneath the long notes like a river moving under ice. As if he was not mourning. As if he was waiting. I set down the cold tea and was reaching for my cloak when my second, Torval, knocked and opened the door in the same breath. "There's a woman at the outer gate," he said. I looked at him. "It's the 2nd hour of the night." "Yes." He paused, and his expression was the one he wore when he had more information than he wanted to deliver. "On foot. She came down from the Grey Vein Pass on the North Road. Our gatewatch says she's in bad shape. Frost on her cloak, no horse, no pack that they can see. She asked for shelter in the hold's name." Another pause. "And she says she is a healer." The word landed between us quietly. "There are riders behind her," Torval added. "Our outriders spotted them. A half-hour back, maybe less. 4 men bearing the warden's seal from the Coldfen district." I thought of 9 days of that sound, traveling through the walls of my home. I thought of the pack hunters waking in the dark. "Bring her in," I said. "The riders can wait at the outer gate until morning." Torval went. I pulled my cloak on and followed. She was standing in the inner courtyard when I came down from the east tower, and she was smaller than I expected. Not slight, precisely, but compact in the way of someone accustomed to working with her hands in small spaces. Her movements economical and sure even through the evident exhaustion. Her cloak was dark and travel-worn, dusted with frost at the shoulders and hem. Her hair was pinned back from her face in a practical knot that had partially come undone in the wind. She was looking at the hold's walls with the quiet, assessing attention of someone who was cataloging, not admiring. My gate watch had given her a wool blanket, which she was holding around her shoulders without theatrics, and when I came down the steps into the courtyard she turned and looked at me with the same attention she'd been giving the walls, direct, measuring, and entirely without the performance of deference that I was accustomed to receiving at midnight from a woman who'd been caught on the road in a snowstorm with riders behind her. "My lord," she said, her voice was steady. Only her hands, gripping the blanket, showed any sign of the cold. "You said you were a healer," I said. "I am. Where do you practice?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the shape of something complicated. "Until 3 weeks ago, the Coldfen district, the lower valley settlements." She looked at me steadily. "I understand the warden's men are behind me." "They are. What do they want?" "They want me returned." She said it without flinching, without the slump of the accused. "The warden has branded me a thief. I did not steal anything. He took my healing stores by force after I refused to hand them to his household without compensation, then registered the confiscation as a theft by me to protect himself from challenge. Her chin was level. I have no proof with me. I understand you cannot simply take my word. I studied her for a moment. The hold's courtyard torches threw warm light across her face. Tired, cold, clear-eyed. Whatever else she was or was not, she was not afraid of me. Women who came to my gate frightened were afraid of me. She was not frightened of me at all. She was frightened of something behind her, and she had made the decision to face forward anyway. You'll be put in the East Guest Hall tonight, I said. In the morning I'll send men to Coldfen to verify your account before I deal with the warden's riders. Until then you're a guest of Ashenvane and under hold protection. I nodded to Torval. Torval will take you in. She dipped her head. Not quite a bow, an acknowledgement, precise and dignified. Thank you, my lord. Torval moved to take her toward the inner hall. They had gone perhaps 15 paces when I heard it. The howling, which had been its constant 9-day frequency, paused. Not stopped. Paused, the way a note pauses before it resolves into something else. I stood in the empty courtyard and listened to the silence where the sound had been. After a moment, it did not return. I went inside. I was not there when Korath found her. I learned it afterward from Torval, who had been walking her to the guest hall through the east corridor and had looked back at a sound and found the great wolf standing in the passage behind them. This in itself was extraordinary. Korath had not come out of his den in 9 days. The east corridor was 30 paces from his den's entrance, and in 9 years I had not known him to come that far without a clear reason. He moved through the hold spaces like weather, enormous and purposeful, and always towards something specific. He was not wandering. He had followed her scent from the courtyard through the inner halls, and he had found her in the corridor. Torval stopped walking. He told me later that he had put himself between the wolf and the woman as a precaution. Korath had not hurt anyone, but he was the size of a small horse, and his refusal of the previous healers had not been gentle. And then the woman had said, quietly, "It's all right," and stepped around him. She stood in the corridor with the great wolf at the other end of it, and she simply waited. She did not call to him. She did not reach out her hand. She stood still in the way of someone who understood that stillness was its own kind of invitation. And after a long moment, Korath crossed the 30 feet between them, with his head low and his ears soft, and he pressed his enormous nose to her open palm. Then he lowered his head the rest of the way and rested it, the full weight of that great skull, which was as wide as a man's shoulders, in her hands. I was not there to see it, but I felt it. The wolf bond between Korath and myself was not a thing of words or images. It did not translate. It was more like temperature, a constant quiet reading of his state that ran beneath everything I did. For 9 years, ever since Marin died, that reading had been low and gray and still, the way a fire reads when the coals have burned down to ash and not quite gone cold. I had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a room that is always the same temperature. It was just the baseline, the color of living without warmth. I was in my study when it changed. I was standing at my desk reading the border reports and I felt it. Not a surge, not a dramatic ignition, but something quieter and stranger than that. I felt warmth. Warmth from somewhere else, coming through the bond the way dawn comes through stone. Slowly, and then suddenly all at once. I put the papers down. I stood very still. The warmth moved through the bond with the quality of something that had always been true, but had just been found. I went to the east corridor. She was sitting on the floor. Not collapsed. Chosen. She had settled herself cross-legged on the stone flags of the corridor, with the neatness of someone who had decided that the floor was where she was going to be for some time, and Korath's enormous head was in her lap. She was running her hands along the base of his skull with the deliberate, searching attention of a healer. Not stroking, not the anxious soothing of someone uncertain of the animal's mood, but feeling, finding things. Her eyes were half closed with concentration, and her lips moved slightly, cataloging. Korath's eyes were closed entirely. His breathing had lengthened. His flank rose and fell with the slow regularity of sleep, and the 9-day sound was gone. Not suppressed, not merely paused, but genuinely gone, in the way that a fever breaks, and you know by the quality of the silence that it will not return. Torval stood at the far end of the corridor, keeping a careful distance. He caught my eye when I appeared and spread his hands in a gesture that meant, "I have no explanation for this." I had none either. I walked to the corridor's midpoint and stopped there, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening. The woman had not looked up. After a moment she said, without raising her eyes from the wolf, "He has something in the muscle behind his left ear. Deep tissue, old, very old. Years of tension, I think. It's made a kind of knot that pulls whenever he tries to lower his head all the way." She paused, pressing 2 fingers carefully to a point behind the ear, and Korath's left leg twitched once and then settled. "He hasn't been able to sleep without pain for a long time." I stood still. "He refused 9 healers." "I know." She was quiet for a moment, working slowly. "I suspect they all went to the right of his face. The problem is on the left, and they probably all came to him, walked up to him, which is reasonable. It's what you'd do with any animal. But with a wolf this size, it feels like approach, like a challenge." She glanced up at me briefly. I waited for him. I did not have an immediate answer to that. I stood in the corridor of my own hold, watching my great wolf sleep in the lap of a woman who had arrived frostbitten and hunted at my gate 2 hours ago, and I tried to find words for what I was looking at. They did not come. "Your hands," I said finally. She looked at them, then back at me. They were bare. She'd removed her gloves, and I could see now that they were a healer's hands in truth. Precise, careful, with the small, careful scars of someone accustomed to working with sharp things. The kind of hands that had done this work for years. "Were you trained formally?" I asked. "My mother was the settle healer for the lower Coldfen Valley. I worked with her from the time I was old enough to carry a kit." She moved her hands again along Korath's neck, slow and exact. "She died 7 years ago. I took her roots. Alone. Alone. No self-pity in the word, just a fact. And the warden's charge." She was quiet for a moment. Korath shifted slightly under her hands and she stilled until he settled again. 3 weeks ago, the warden's steward came to my cottage to take my winter stores, the full supply I'd prepared for the valley settlements through the cold months, 3 dozen families. The steward said the warden was commandeering them for the district household. I told him I would bring a portion to the warden's household willingly and keep the rest for the settlements that depended on them. The steward said that was not acceptable. She paused. I refused. He took the stores by force, with 6 men. A week later, the warden registered a theft complaint against me to the district council, naming me as the thief of his stores that I had prepared and that he had taken from me. My name was put to the district seal. The riders behind me carry a warrant. The cold in my chest that had been there for 9 years did something unusual. It sharpened into something else. Not grief this time. Anger. "What was in the stores?" I said. "Fever bark and snow moss for winter lung illness. Wound pack for the hunting injuries. Poppy reduction for pain. Splinting materials." She looked at her hands. "Enough for 30 families through to the spring thaw. They would have gone without. And you." "And I." She said it simply. "But I can find more. They cannot find it without help." I looked at her for a long time. Korath breathed on. The corridor was very quiet, and the warmth that had come through the bond was still present, a low, steady thing, like a fire recently lit in a room that had been cold for a long time. "Sleep here tonight," I said. "Korath won't leave you now that he's found you, and moving him before morning will undo what you've done." She looked at the wolf in her lap with an expression I could not entirely read. Not fear, not reluctance, something more like a complicated tenderness, the look of someone who had not expected to be needed and was not sure what to do with it now that it had arrived. "I'm not going to be able to carry him to a bed," she said. It startled a brief sound out of me. Not quite a laugh, not a sound I made often. "No," I agreed. "I'll send blankets." I sent Torval for blankets and a lamp and the remains of the evening meal, and I stood for a few more minutes in the corridor watching my wolf sleep in the lap of a woman who had arrived from nowhere at the 2nd hour of the night, and then I did something I had not done in 9 years. I went to bed and slept. I woke 3 hours before dawn, and the bond was still warm. I went down to the corridor and found her exactly as I had left her. Korath's head still in her lap, both of them deeply asleep in the lamplight with a blanket pulled around her shoulders, and the tray of food half finished beside her. She had eaten, at least, in sleep. Without the careful steadiness of her waking expression, she looked younger and more tired, the marks of 3 weeks of running visible in the lines of her face, the shadows beneath her eyes. I sat on the corridor floor, my back against the wall across from her, and I watched Korath breathe. His chest rose and fell with a regularity I had not seen from him in 9 years. The tension that had made him hold his neck high and stiff even in rest was gone. His head rested with its full weight, easy, the muscles in his shoulders finally released. I did not know what to do with what I felt through the bond. I had told myself for 9 years that the warmth in it was simply gone, the way a color goes when there is no light to find it, that the gray was simply what was left. I had not let myself want for the warmth's return, because wanting for things that cannot return is how a man comes undone. But it was there, undeniable and quiet, and coming through the point where my bond to Korath ran into something it had recognized and named. I was still sitting against the wall when she woke. She opened her eyes without the usual confusion of waking in an unknown place. Again, that quality of directness, of arriving in the present moment without needing to be oriented. She looked at Korath, still sleeping. She looked at me across the corridor. "You're watching him," she said. Her voice was quiet, rough with sleep. "I'm watching both of you," I said, which was more honest than I had intended. She looked at me for a moment, and something moved in her expression that she did not entirely manage to contain. Not wariness, not the practiced blankness of someone guarding themselves, but something more like surprise, as if she had not been watched with this quality of attention in a long time, and was not sure what it meant. Then she looked back at Korath and laid one careful hand along his neck. "How long has he been in pain?" she asked. "The full tension? I don't know. It came on gradually after my Luna died." I paused. 9 years. She was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, not as a formality, but as a real thing, offered plainly. "He was hers," I said, "before he was mine, in a way. She found the bond between us. She was the one who understood what he was." I stopped, because I had not said this out loud to anyone, ever, and I was not sure where it had come from. I think he carried her, when she went. I think it did something to the muscle. Grief sits in the body. She nodded slowly, as if she had seen this before. "It does," she said, "in wolves and in people." Korath shifted in her lap, his enormous tail thumping once against the floor in his sleep, and she smiled. A brief, real thing that changed her face entirely, and was gone before I could catalog it. "What's your name?" I said. "Saren." She looked up. "Of the Cold Fen Lower Valley, though I'm not sure the Lower Valley is my home anymore. What do you want it to be?" The question seemed to surprise her. She considered it with the same seriousness she brought to everything else. "Somewhere I can work," she said at last. "Somewhere the work reaches the people who need it. At dawn I sent 4 men to Cold Fen. I sent them with instructions to speak to the settle healers, the village elders, and the district council records, and to bring back whatever they could find regarding the warden's confiscation, the warrant, and the woman named Saren. It was a 2-day ride in good snow. They left before the light was full. The warden's riders arrived at the outer gate at the 6th hour of the morning. There were 4 of them, as Torval had reported, all bearing the Cold Fen district seal on their cloaks, and their leader was a broad-shouldered man of middle age who presented his warrant at the gate with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to having warrants acted upon. He asked for the woman. He used the word fugitive. He used the words district property, which was an interesting choice of words for a person, and I filed it away. I received him in the outer hall rather than the great hall, which is a deliberate choice in Ashenvane. The outer hall is comfortable but not ceremonial. It says you are being heard, not that you are a peer. "The woman arrived at my gate last night," I told him. "She has hold protection." The rider's expression tightened. "My lord, the warrant is a document prepared by the warden's office," I said. "I have dispatched men to verify the account on both sides. They will return in 2 days. Until then, the woman stays under hold protection, and you are welcome to wait at the outer post or return to Cold Fen." "My lord, the warden is the district authority in Cold Fen," I said, "and I am the pack authority in the Northern Territories, including Cold Fen, and I outrank his warrant. 2 days. The rider looked at me for a long moment, with the expression of a man calculating whether there was any version of this where he won. He arrived at the correct answer. 2 days, he said tightly. They went to the outer post. I turned back to the inner hold, where somewhere in the east wing, Korath was still asleep. She spent the second day with the wolves. I do not mean only Korath. Within a few hours of dawn, once the word had moved through the hold spaces, the way word always moves among wolves, through some combination of scent and bond, and the simple fact that Korath was sleeping without howling, the rest of Ashenvane's pack had begun to appear in the East Wing corridor. Not all at once, in the way of wolves, singly and in small groups, drawn by curiosity and by the quality of Korath's stillness, which was different now from the tense stillness of pain, and different again from the gray stillness of the last 9 years. It was a different stillness altogether, rested. She sat with them. I watched from the corridor's end, far enough back to stay out of her way. She did not perform for them. She did not make any effort to approach them or win them or demonstrate herself. She sat on the floor with Korath's head no longer in her lap, but beside her. He had woken by mid-morning and settled himself next to her as if this were his permanent arrangement, and the other wolves came and went at their own pace, and some of them lay down near her, and some of them accepted her hands on them briefly, and some simply looked and moved on, and she let all of it happen at the pace it happened. Torval appeared at my shoulder sometime in the mid-morning. The old moonseer is asking about her, he said. What does she want? To look at her hands. I glanced at him. Let the moonseer do as she likes. The moonseer was 83 years old, and had been at Ashenvane since before I was born. She was not technically a healer. She read the moon tides and the bond patterns, and occasionally the bones of animals, and she was right often enough that I had stopped arguing with her assessment of things. She came to the East Wing in the late morning, walked past Korath and the assembled wolves without acknowledging them, and stood in front of Saren for a long moment in silence. Saren looked up at her without unease. The moonseer took Saren's hands in both of hers and turned them palm up. She studied them for a time that felt longer than it probably was. Then she said, to no one in particular, "The bond is already moving." She put the hands down and walked away without another word. I stood in the corridor and did not move. That night, after the pack had dispersed and Korath had retreated to his den, not to howl, not in pain, but in the simple, natural rest of an animal finally comfortable in its own body, I brought Saren to the hall and gave her supper properly, at the table, with a fire and something better than corridor floor. She ate with the appetite of someone who had not had a reliable meal in 3 weeks, and the manners of someone who had been raised to eat properly regardless of how hungry they were. She did not speak unnecessarily. Neither did I. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who were comfortable with what silence meant. After a while I said, "The moonseer said the bond is already moving." She looked at her hands, which were wrapped around the cup of warm drink Torval had brought. "I know," she said. I waited. "I've been feeling it since the North Road," she said. "Since I saw the hold's lights from the pass. It was a pull, not dramatic, like remembering the name of something you've known for a long time." She paused. "I thought it might be exhaustion. And now?" She looked at me across the table with her direct, measuring look. "Now Korath is sleeping without pain for the first time in 9 years, and a moonseer I've never met is telling me the bond is already moving." Her voice was dry, but underneath it I heard the real thing. Not fear, not reluctance, but the careful honesty of someone who had learned to tell the truth about her own feelings, and had found it costly. "It doesn't feel like exhaustion." I was quiet for a moment. "What does it feel like?" She thought about this with her full attention. "Like finding out that somewhere is home," she said, "before you've decided to let it be." The fire moved in the hearth. Outside, somewhere in the hold's deep interior, I could feel through the bond that Korath was still sleeping, the warm, deep, genuine sleep of an animal at peace. 9 years. 9 years of the gray, and now this. Warmth at the table, and a woman telling me that somewhere felt like home, before she'd decided to let it. "I have to tell you what I am," I said. "I know what you are. Not the title. What it means." I looked at the fire rather than at her, because some things are easier said to a fire. Marin died 9 years ago. She was the best part of what I was, and when she went, I closed a door I had not fully meant to close. I didn't close it with grief. I closed it because leaving it open felt like asking for something I didn't deserve to have again. I paused. "I have not been looking for what you are. I need you to know that. Whatever you decide, it's because you've decided it, not because of what Korath chose or what the bond is doing. She was quiet for a long time. The fire moved. That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 weeks, she said. It startled something brief and real out of me. The second time in 2 days she'd done that. What was the least honest? The warden is a fair man. She looked at me across the table with something that was not quite a smile but lived next to one. The outrider said it to me with a straight face. I found myself looking at her. Truly looking. The way I had been not quite allowing myself to do since the corridor. At the weariness that was real, and the steadiness that was more real. At the quality of precision in her face that was not coldness but care. The care of someone who did not want to be careless about what mattered. At the hands around the cup that had found the point behind a great wolf's ear that 9 healers had missed. You can stay, I said. Whatever the rider's warrant says, Cold Fen is in my territory, and the warden answers to me. And when my men come back in 2 days, I will know exactly what he did. Your name will be cleared. I paused. But beyond that, the hold has no settle healer. It has not had one since before Marin died. The valley settlements to the south need someone who will do for them what you did for the Cold Fen Lower Valley. And Korath needs... I stopped. Someone who will wait for him, she said quietly. Yes. She looked down at her cup. Something in her face moved. The careful composure shifting, just slightly. The way ice shifts before a thaw. Not breaking, not sudden. Just the first small sign of warmth moving underneath. She said slowly, I spent 3 weeks running from a man who decided I was less valuable than the things in my kit. I am. She stopped, started again. I would like to stay somewhere a while. Long enough to stop looking at doors. Then stay. She looked at me. The firelight was warm, and the hold was quiet around us, and I could feel through the bond that Korath had shifted in his den, not waking, just adjusting, as if in his sleep he knew that something had been decided. I would need to know, she said carefully, that I'm staying as myself, not as a function. You'd be staying as the pack's settle healer, I said, for as long as you want it. The rest, I chose the words carefully. The way she had been teaching me to choose things without realizing she was teaching me anything. The rest follows its own course. I won't hurry it. I won't ask for what it doesn't offer. I told you what I am. A man who closed a door and hasn't opened it in 9 years, and I'm not asking you to open it for me. She was quiet. Then, what if I wanted to open it? The fire moved. Korath slept. Somewhere outside, the snow was still falling on the Gravane peaks, and 4 riders were waiting at the outer post for a warrant that was already worth nothing. I said, then I would ask you to open it slowly, because I am out of practice. A sound came from her, brief, real, the kind of laugh that a person has no control over, the kind that comes when something genuine finds an unguarded moment. It disappeared quickly, and she looked down at her cup and then back at me with her eyes bright, and her mouth doing something between composure and warmth that I was going to have to learn to read. Slowly, she agreed. I can do slowly. My men came back from Cold Fen on the 2nd afternoon with more than I had sent them to find. They had spoken to 11 families in the lower valley settlements, families who confirmed, without prompting, that Saren had been their healer for 7 years, and that the loss of her winter stores had left them without fever bark and snow moss in the worst month of the cold season. They had spoken to the district council recorder, a careful man who had kept notes on the warden's conduct for his own protection and was relieved, at the appearance of Ashenvane riders, to produce them. And they had found, in the records, that the warden had done this before, 3 times in the past decade, 4 times the decade before, always to practitioners who lacked the standing to challenge him. Always the same pattern, confiscation, followed by a registered complaint to preempt any challenge. I received the rider's warrant in the outer hall. I did not shout. I have learned that shouting is what men do when they need volume to cover the absence of authority. I have enough authority. I use it quietly. The warrant is nullified, I said. The warden will appear before the Northern Council in the spring to answer for the confiscation and for the fraudulent complaint. His seal is suspended in the Cold Fen district, pending the outcome. The rider, the same broad-shouldered man as before, was very still. My lord, the woman remains under hold protection and is appointed settle healer of Ashenvane. She is under pack authority from this moment. If the warden disputes the nullification, he may bring his case to the Spring Council, where I will be very pleased to show the council 11 families and a district recorder. I stood. You're dismissed. They went. I did not watch them go. I went to find Saren. She was in the east corridor again, not because Korath had summoned her, but because he had come to find her. This seemed to be the arrangement now. Wherever she was in the hold, Korath would appear within the hour. Not demanding, not anxious, simply present, in the way of an old dog who has decided that the best place in the house is wherever a particular person is. She was checking his ears, both of them, the left with more care, with the small lamp she'd taken to carrying, so the light was always good in the hold's dim passages. She looked up when I came around the corner, and whatever she saw in my face told her before I spoke. "Done?" she said. "Done. The warrant is nullified. The warden will face the council in the spring." She let out a breath, a long, slow one, the kind that carries something that has been held for weeks. Korath turned his enormous head toward her, and she pressed her forehead briefly, gently, to the top of his skull. He did not move. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't need my help," I said. "You needed time for the record to be checked." "I needed someone to give me the time." She looked at me steadily. "That's not nothing." I sat down on the corridor floor, because Korath was between us, and going around him would have broken the conversation, and because it seemed, over the last 2 days, to be the posture this corridor required. She looked at me for a moment, and then sat back against the wall beside Korath, and the three of us were still. After a while I said, "The Moonseer would like to read the bond." "What does that mean?" "She'll look at our wrists. The mate mark, when it comes, shows on the inside of the wrist, a pattern unique to the pairing. Sometimes the pattern is already forming before both people know what they've decided." I paused. "She says it's already moving." Saren looked at her left wrist, turned it. In the lamplight I looked too, nothing visible yet, but I felt, through the bond, the thing I had been feeling for 2 days. Warmth, steady and growing, the specific warmth that has a direction. "And you?" she said. "Do you want her to read it?" I considered the question honestly, the way she had been asking me to consider things. "I think I want to know that it's real," I said. "Not because I doubt what I feel, but because 9 years is a long time to keep a door closed. If the mark is forming, it means I didn't decide this for the wrong reasons." "What would the wrong reasons be?" "Because Korath chose you. Because you were kind to him. Because I haven't been warm in a long time and warmth is convincing." I stopped. "I want to know that it's you, not the warmth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think if it were only the warmth, Korath would have chosen one of the 9 healers before me." It was the right thing to say, and she said it simply, without strategy, the way she said most things, as a plain truth that she had thought about and found sound. I held out my wrist. She looked at it for a moment. Then she held out hers, and in the lamplight I saw it. Faint, but there. A pattern on the inside of her wrist. Pale silver. The way a mark looks when it is still becoming. I looked at my own wrist. The same pattern, mirror exact, in the same pale silver. Korath lifted his head and looked at both of us with the expression of an animal that has been trying to communicate something for a long time and has finally succeeded. She laughed. The real one, the unguarded one, the one she had no control over. And I felt something in my chest that I had no adequate word for, except that it was the opposite of the gray. "I'd like the Moonseer to see this," she said. "So would I." The Moonseer saw it that evening. She turned our wrists in the lamplight for a long time, her ancient eyes moving from one to the other, and then she said, 2 days, which meant the mark would be complete in 2 days, and went to bed. I do not know exactly how to describe what the next 2 days were. The hold was the same hold it had always been, the same stone corridors, the same cold light through the high windows, the same fires and the same hearths. But Korath walked through it without pain, and the gray that had been the temperature of the bond for 9 years was simply gone. In its place, warmth. Not the overwhelming warmth of a first bonding. Nothing was overwhelming about Saren. She did not approach anything that way, but the warmth of something real and quiet and lasting. The warmth of a fire in a house that has been cold for a long time and is slowly, room by room, becoming itself again. She learned the hold. She was methodical about it. not exploring with a traveler's curiosity, but with the attention of someone who intended to know a place well and understood that knowing a place took time and care. She learned where the East Wing wolves denned, and which of them needed a regular eye on an old injury, and which of the pack hunters came back from the winter patrols with frost damage to their hands that they would not volunteer. She had, within 2 days, quietly tripled the number of people in Ashenvane who knew what a settle healer was for. On the evening of the second day, the Moonseer came to the great hall where Saren and I were sitting after supper and looked at our wrists and said simply, "Now," and went to bed again. We were alone in the hall. The fire was the only light. Korath was sleeping in the doorway, which was his new arrangement, between the great hall and the corridor, in a position that allowed him to see both. I looked at the mark on my wrist. It was complete, a pattern of interlocked lines that moved like the grain in old wood, and shone softly silver in the firelight, and was the same as the one on her wrist. I had seen this once before, with Marin, and I had not expected to see it again. Saren was looking at hers. Something moved in her face, not the careful composure, not the directness, but something unguarded and quiet, the face of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not quite allow themselves to expect to arrive. "The mark is a bond, not a command," I said. I had thought about how to say this for 2 days. "It means we are matched. It doesn't mean you owe me anything for it. It doesn't change what I said at the table. The rest follows its own course. The mark simply means the course is real." She looked at me. "I know what it means. I want to be sure you know what it doesn't mean." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I was running on the North Road, I had nothing. I had the clothes I was wearing, and the small kid I'd managed to keep, and 3 weeks of being wrong about where I thought I was going." A pause. "I didn't know I was coming here. I just knew I had to keep moving." She looked at the mark, "And I ended up here, and Korath found me, and you sat on the floor of a corridor and watched your wolf breathe." She looked at me. "I am not frightened of this bond. I am careful about it, because I've lost things before and I know what it costs." She stopped. "But I don't want to be so careful that I miss the thing I came here for." I held out my wrist. She looked at it for a moment. Then she placed her wrist against mine. Not a dramatic gesture, not a ceremony. Simply her wrist against mine, the 2 marks aligned, warm and silver in the firelight. The bond settled, not with a surge or a blaze, with the quiet certainty of 2 things finding their correct position, the way a door that has been hanging slightly wrong will find its latch when someone takes the time to set the frame right. It settled, and I felt it through every part of me that had been gray for 9 years, and the gray was done. Korath opened one enormous eye from the doorway, regarded us for a moment with the expression of an animal whose 9-year project had finally concluded to his satisfaction, and went back to sleep. Years later, when our son asked why I had kept Korath's den in the East Wing even after the wolf was too old to use the corridor independently, I told him the truth. Because that corridor was where she had sat on the cold floor in the middle of the night and waited for the great wolf to come to her in his own time. And some places deserved to stay what they were. The boy considered this with the serious attention that was entirely his mother's. Then he went to find Korath, who was sleeping in the great hall by the hearth, and sat down next to him on the floor. I sat at the table and watched them, and I thought of what Saren had said on the North Road, that she had not known where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. And I thought of the 9 days of howling that I would hear in my memory for the rest of my life, as the sound of something real, almost failing to be found. And I thought of the corridor, of her sitting on the stone floor with the lamplight on her face and the great wolf's head resting in her hands at last, and the warmth that had moved through the bond like dawn coming through stone. Slowly, and then suddenly all at once.